The Demyansk Pocket was the name of a pocket of German troops encircled by the Red Army around Demyansk, just south of Leningrad, during the Eastern Front of World War II. The encirclement began as the Demyansk Offensive Operation, the first phase being carried out from January 7 to May 20, 1942, by the Red Army General Lieutenant Pavel Kurochkin, the commander of the Soviets' North-Western Front. The intention was to sever the link between the German Demyansk positions and the Stara Russa railway that formed the lines of communication of the German 16th Army. But because of the very difficult wooded and swampy region, along with the heavy snow cover, the initial advance by there was very slow against stubborn German resistance. On January 8, 1942, the Red Army launched the Vyazma strategic offensive, which incorporated the previous front's planning into the Terepitskом offensive operation between January 9 and February 6, 1942, which formed the southern pincer of the attack that began the second phase of the northern pincer of the Demyansk offensive operation, between January 7 and May 20, which encircled the German 16th Army's 2nd Army Corps, and parts of the 10th Army Corps during the winter of 1941–42. The intention of the Northwestern Front offensive was to encircle the entire northern flank of the German 16th Army's forces, of which the 2nd Army Corps was a small part, and the Soviet High Command was desperate to keep the front lines moving after this initial success. The first thrust was made by the 11th Army, the 1st Shock Army and the 1st and 2nd Guards Rifle Corps, and a second thrust was executed on February 12, by the 3rd and 4th Shock Armies of the Kalinin Front, with the additional plan of directly attacking the encircled German forces by inserting 2 airborne brigades to support the advance of the Soviet 34th Army. The front later settled as the Soviet offensive petered out due to difficult terrain and bad weather. After being assured that the pocket could be supplied with its daily requirement of 270 tons of supplies by Luftflotte 1, German leader Adolf Hitler ordered that the surrounded divisions hold their positions until relieved. The pocket contained 2 viable airfields at Demyansk and Pesky that had the capacity of dealing with transport aircraft. From the middle of February, the weather improved significantly, and while there was still considerable snow cover, resupply operations were successful due to the lack of Soviet air superiority in the area. Unfortunately for the German forces, the operation did use up all of Luftflotte 1's transport capability, as well as elements of its bomber force. Over the winter and spring, the Northwestern Front launched a number of attacks on an area called their Ramushvo Corridor, that formed the fragile link between Demyansk and Stara Russa, but the Red Army was unable to reduce the size of the pocket. On March 21, 1942, German forces under the command of General Walter von Seydlitz-Kurzbach attempted to maneuver through the Ramushvo Corridor. Soviet resistance on the Lovat River delayed the German 2nd Corps' attack until April 14, 1942. Over the next few weeks, the Ramushvo Corridor was widened. A German battle group was able to break the Soviet siege on April 22, but the fighting had taken a heavy toll on them. Out of the roughly 100,000 men originally in the pocket, there were 3,335 killed in action, and over 10,000 were wounded. Between the formation of the pocket in early February and the relief of Demyansk in May, both the Demyansk and Com pockets 59,000 tons of supplies, both through ground and aerial delivery. In addition, they receive 31,000 replacement troops, and 36,000 wounded soldiers were evacuated. The supplies were delivered by over 100 flights of Junkers Ju-52 transport aircraft on a daily basis. The cost to the Luftwaffe was massive, with the loss of 265 aircraft, including 106 Junkers Ju-52s, 17 Heinkel He-111s, and 2 Junkers Ju-86 aircraft. In addition, 387 airmen died. Fighting in the area continued until February 28, 1943. The Soviet forces did not retake Demyansk until March 1 that year, after the organized withdrawal of German troops. The success of the Luftwaffe convinced Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring and Hitler that they could conduct more airlift operations on the Eastern Front. After the German Sixth Army was encircled in the Battle of Stalingrad, Hermann Göring convinced Hitler to resupply the besieged forces by airlift until a relief force could reach them. But the sheer scale of the effort required for Stalingrad, it was calculated at 750 tons of supplies per day, greatly exceeded the Luftwaffe's depleted capacity when up against the Soviet Air Force. The Stalingrad airlift attempt failed to deliver enough supplies before the airfields were overrun by the Soviets, and the Germans estimated that they lost 488 transports, as well as 1,000 personnel. In spite of the airlift's obvious shortcomings, Hitler refused permission for the Sixth Army to attempt a breakout. The remaining 300,000 German soldiers trapped in the city ran out of supplies and had to surrender in early February 1943, after having lost a further 100,000 soldiers in combat between November of 1942 and February of 1943.